Are we on the verge of the next Terminator? Is our future God going to be AI? What is the philosophical implications of having a computer that's smarter than us?
On the physical side, we've experienced this for a long time. Like if you look at a digger, it can dig out a lot more earth than a human with a shovel. By probably 100 or 1,000 times or something, and do so for longer and more consistently. So it'll be good in the sense that we can use this to apply to like scientific problems and all kinds of other problems, and it'll probably actually advance all technology faster because of that, and that's really interesting.
And also, how do you build things people want to use? So this is a very deep philosophical debate on the implications of AI. So we could go anywhere. I think AI, I always think people want to know who I'm talking to, just to like set the expectation. So I guess, how would you encapsulate what you do?
Oh, well, for the last 15 years, I've been running a software development agency. So build fully custom software, web-based mobile apps, mostly for internal business use, not so much consumer-facing. Always varied, always interesting, and you're learning about completely different industries all the time. But the idea is usually, people will obviously use a piece of software that they can buy off the shelf if it does what they want. So where we come in is usually either that they can't find something that really works for their particular company, or they're trying to create some really unique market advantage.
What's one of the things you're most proud of around that space where you're like, wow, that's unique? How do we create that? You can swear, by the way. If you don't want me to, I can try.
No, that's fine. A current project that we've nearly finished is just world class. We've just built a full no-code platform for basically what is a law firm, and it just allows them to just configure up all their own processes, and they just own the platform completely. And the reason they've got us to build one rather than using one off the shelf is primarily because they kind of sit at the hub of their part of the law industry, and they have all sorts of other companies and practitioners that plug into them. And apart from their own needs, they want to be able to configure out business processes for all their customers. So that's truly was an incredibly challenging project to basically build something that allows someone with no developer experience to build their own custom applications, and to do so in a space that is with such high security requirements and other kind of high-end requirements as law.
What on that, like, is there behavioral components that come into what you do? Because I've seen things like the way mobile apps load. It's like if you see the gray coming as the page loads, you're less likely to be stressed about how long it's taking. User experience, stuff like that. Like, or even just in an elevator, they put a mirror in there so you don't realize how long you're waiting. Do you think about that? How people consume the app itself?
Mirror in the elevator so you could check your hair or something.
Yeah, well, you forget.
Yeah,
you forget how long it takes.
That's the very fine edge of the wedge of a field called UX, or user experience. So user experience, you're obviously trying to minimize the steps, make things as clear and obvious as possible, make sure people don't have to use their human memory, like use the app's memory where you can. And things like that. Now, when you're getting to sort of like how it emotively impacts people along the journey, that's the real fine edge of sort of specialist UX consulting.
What is the lessons you sort of learn about humans? Like, have you been surprised about the way they consume a product? You thought it was going to be this way,
question. Don't often get that.
Oh, yeah.
People always ask about tech rather than humans. That's a really good question. Yes, always surprised. So one of the things I love doing is getting out and seeing software working at the coalface with people using it. So we have tablets that run on the dashboard of trucks. We have apps that have been used in medical centers and things like that, and all kinds of situations. And every time you go and you actually watch users using it, you get surprises. And you find out things that just like, for instance, where they leave something charged, if that's practical or impractical, it means it's never charged because the charging station's in the wrong place. Or, the fact that, there's so many environmental factors in the way people do their job And we've had software where people have been using it for years and there's been no feedback through the customer about a problem. And then you go and watch someone using it and you go, hey, you're really struggling with that bit. We need to change that. So yeah, always different to what you expect.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there's a certain component of pattern recognition. So you've seen a certain type of behavior from a certain type of person. So you try to build that in. And then there's iteration.
Yes.
From actually witnessing it. How do you, I guess, stop yourself from having confirmation bias in the sense that you expect this to happen, but how do you keep it practical and appropriate for the actual person?
Yeah. So you start by trying to design things based on the best of your experience, but there's just no substitute for proper user testing where you try and sit back and just observe what people really do. And you can usually see when they're struggling with something because they'll pause or they'll sort of go in the wrong direction. And unless you do that, you will always, if you just talk to people about it, even your confirmation bias will kick in. You've just got to observe.
Wow, you seem very practical and rational. How's that been from developing your business and the EQ and emotional component of trying to nurture and support people? Because I imagine you have software people, they're very thing orientated as opposed to people orientated, generally. Yeah, but not always. So how do you navigate the people component within an organization?
Well, we try to employ people who will relate well to customers and be a good fit in the team. We've found that extremely important, and I haven't found typically that there's this big kind of conflict between really good developers and people with good people skills. Some of my best developers have the best people skills as well. I mean, yeah, it's not always the case. Sometimes you'll get someone who's just an awesome developer and their people skills are less awesome. But I just think it's really important because what happens in a lot of businesses is you get all this fat because you have the people with people skills dealing with the customers, and then they have to try and translate to the developers doing the development. Whereas we'll try and have a project lead developer who's leading the project, understands it really deeply, but is also relating directly to the customer, so they understand the customer's world and they can kind of. Otherwise, what happens is a lot of things often get lost in translation. So we find that a really good model, but that does require hiring the right people in the first place. But the good part is we've had very sort of strong internal culture because of the kind of people we've had working for us. And that's just one of the reasons why we've had sort of staff retention typically sitting up around 5-7 years plus in an industry where a lot of people turn over in 18 months or 2 years.
What do you think that is? Because I see a lot of these people going to Google and they're having their fucking muffin and then they go somewhere else and now they're getting 250K and then 400 and they don't seem to be emotionally invested in any component of the business. They like the perks or whatnot. What do you think has been useful in retaining people or attracting them?
I can't speak for Google, but there are a lot of the sort of big tech culture in the States has had this sort of, and it's translated down to New Zealand a bit as well, has had this culture of paying developers a lot and then just like sucking the life out of them, just expecting them just to smash out the hours and live and breathe it. And we really believe in work-life balance. So, all our employees work a normal week. If it was a real emergency, they might work a bit extra, but it's not normal at all. And so I think that's a factor, but a big factor is also a type of projects we do. Like if you're a small cog in a really enormous software project, you can spend like years just working in one tiny corner of it. Like I've heard of people just working on one object within an application for years. And that gets pretty boring. Likewise, if you're sort of with a company that does really small development, it might be all a bit trivial and low end and not very interesting. So we're in this really nice sweet spot where our projects are large, really interesting to developers, but they get to be quite holistically involved across the project because the teams are usually only sort of 2 to 5 people.
So it sounds like you have a high bar of recruitment in the sense because people skills, overarching view and understanding of larger projects and being able to do large components of it.
Yes.
How are you doing that in New Zealand? How are you finding these people? Or you're just struggling, just slaving away, trying to find people from the depths?
Mostly just through my network, to be honest.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We haven't ever gone through a recruitment agency. So, yeah.
What's your process to bring someone on? Like, how do you identify people skills, or do you take them for a drink, or what are you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the people skills part is pretty easy to pick up on.
Yeah.
What's harder is to pick up on like how capable someone will actually be as a developer. So I try and get my other developers involved in key recruitment because they can have like really deep technical chats with them and give me feedback on that. But you never really... well, that's why it's really good to go on a recommendation too. Like if somebody's worked with somebody before or... that's really awesome because they kind of know their working style.
So you wouldn't like put them in front, here's this project, go, or anything like that, I guess, because you can't really do that because you're exposing IP or privacy or...
If, once they're employed, they've signed up to all the things in your employment contract. Yeah.
No, I mean, like, so you need a test competency. You're using referral as a means to test competency or recommendation, you see.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like if you want a football player, you get them to play football. You're like, oh, yeah, are you good?
Yeah, we've tried using tests before, and
Yeah.
it was weird. It didn't really seem to give very meaningful results. But yeah, I found a better result was just really deep conversations between developers. They kind of tend to suss out where people are at.
Random. We talked off here like we were going to talk about AI, but then I just started going straight into your business. So
right.
how's it working?
Yeah.
But you've got a speech coming up around AI.
Yes.
Curious, who are you speaking to, or what do you?
It's an entrepreneurs organisation event. I think it's just called EO Talks. It's a TEDx style evening of people doing about 15-minute talks. So mine's on AI and you.
I didn't know I was going to be in it.
No, AI.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, actually, EO is a name coming up often now. Quite a few podcast guests, Richard Conway.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Richard Conway, I think, was the person who introduced me to EO.
So you go as well,
Yes.
as well as being a talker.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, because there's some level of benefit with shared humanity and going in depth and also stretching. And one of the structures they have is you say how I as opposed to how you should.
Yes, when you're sharing, you're always sharing from experience rather than giving people advice. It's a really good thing to learn in life, actually. I find it works, in every aspect of life. It's a better way to just sort of let people take what they want to take from your experience rather than saying you should do this or you should do that, which creates an odd dynamic.
It does. Many people like being lectured, huh?
No, and it takes away the discovery for them, but also when you say that, like it creates an awkwardness because if they don't do what you say, then they haven't listened to your advice, and that's kind of awkward. And if they do what you say and then it works out badly, that could be even more awkward.
Yeah, fair enough. So this AI and you, what are some of the topics you're hitting on? What are we getting a behind the scenes scoop or whatever?
It's a little bit of a cross section of everything. So it's talking about AI in terms of where it's at now. And the main thing it's impacting right now is businesses more than individuals. But it's also then talking about, okay, how's it likely to affect us as individuals and our relationships and our society as this kind of kicks off? And, especially as AI has become more relatable, like right now we're mainly using them as tools, but they are also getting more relatable. Like you could sit down like this and kind of try and have a chat with them, and that's getting better and better. And you see kids doing this with Siri. Like we go, hey, Siri, can you do this? And they just sit down and talk to Siri like it's a person. So how will that affect like human society as we have more relatable AIs? So it's really about the tiers of looking at the effect of AI on businesses, on us as individuals, our relationships, and then society as a whole, near term and then longer term. And the longer term is where it gets really sort of interesting in a way.
Yeah, you have any predictions? Not that you'll know, but like what is your biggest fear regarding AI's future?
Well, I think the short-term impacts aren't scary. So the short-term impacts are more to do with how people will use AI, right? Any technology, any empowering that you give to humans is often empowers humans for good and evil, right? So how people use it and how it affects us. Like if we look at the last big thing, social media, we can now start to see what some of the societal effects are. Like I love the way Facebook enables us to stay a lot more connected to remote friends in whānau. But, you can often see that the conversation around social media is about a lot of the toxic effects too. And I think AI will be like that. Like there'll be good things and there'll be things that it affects us negatively at a societal level. And things like disrupting employment markets could also create a lot of stress. But so those are the main kind of like downside risks right now. I mean, right now AI is not sentient. I think it was Dr. Toby Walsh that pointed out that they have no desires of their own, so they don't want to take over, and they won't, and they're not really capable of it. But I mean, they're not even capable of writing a full computer application. They can just write bits of it for you. But longer term is more interesting, because if you get something called an artificial general intelligence, like the superpower that humans have that AI still doesn't have, is the ability to generalize from one area of thinking and apply the insights from that to a whole different domain. And AI still can't do that. If AI could do that, then it will be quite a sort of super intelligence, because it will be able to, if you think about it like this, like imagine if every time a human learnt something, every other human knew it straight away. That'd be pretty amazing. But AI is already like that. Every time ChatGPT learns something, everyone using ChatGPT has access to that learning. If you combined that with the ability to sort of generalize as humans do, then what you've got is kind of a super intelligence that potentially can be far greater than what we are in intelligence. And there's good and bad parts about that. I mean, on the physical side, we've experienced this for a long time. Like if you look at a digger, it can dig out a lot more earth than a human with a shovel, by probably 100 or 1,000 times or something, and do so for longer and more consistently. So it'll be good in the sense that we can use this to apply to like scientific problems and all kinds of other problems, and it'll probably actually advance all technology faster because of that. And that's really interesting. Like, it already cracked the key problem with fusion power, which was how to control the plasma inside a fusion reactor, which they couldn't do with heuristic computer algorithms. So it'll advance all kinds of areas of science, but how do we keep control of something that maybe becomes sort of like equivalent? Like if you imagine the difference between an ant and a human, what if we're the ant and it's the human in terms of the difference in thinking power, capability, and intelligence? That becomes a scary prospect.
Yeah, as soon as it realizes we're not in its best interest of the goal it's trying to achieve, could be interesting.
And that's an interesting point, like the goal it's trying to achieve. Like one of the concerns with AI is not so much that it'll sort of suddenly become like a conscious sentient entity and try and take over everything. It's more that you might get unintended consequences where AI has too narrow an objective. So I don't know if you've seen, I think it's called Class of 08 or Class of 09. It's a series on one of the streaming channels about kind of like a future FBI scenario where they implement AI in law enforcement and automated surveillance. And the thing about it is that its objective is to maintain law and order. But actually, humans don't go to the nth degree to maintain law and order, because if that means maybe in some countries they do, but if that means just sort of killing people that are getting in the way of your program to achieve that outcome, we might think that's not appropriate in the pursuit of law and order. So whereas in this particular case, I don't want to give too much away, but the computer program oversteps the line of what's appropriate in pursuing its narrow objective. And I think there's a sort of a famous thought experiment about an AI that's designed to maximize the production of paper clips, and it decides that it just needs to harness all the Earth's resources to make paper clips. And so it just totally overthinks its like purpose.
Hmm.
You know.
So do you think the narrowness of the objective is what will lead to potential harm? And if so, then what's the counter to making sure it's not too narrow?
I think that, science fiction plays a really good role because it's enabled us to sort of stop and think about a lot of the problems before they happen. And I think there's a lot of people with awareness of a need to control AI. The one difficulty with it, though, is that how do you put limits on something if maybe your competitors won't? And I mean competitors not just in a business sense, but what about a military sense? So you might say, we don't want AI to be able to autonomously kill people in the battlefield, but now some other power has created AI robots that autonomously kill people, and they react so fast that a human soldier can't fight them. What do we do except create the same? So you do get a potential arms race that could be sort of worrying.
Well, that's the thing. I'm a strong believer that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the best protection to humans' cruelty is to enable a fair race, in a sense. Have people that can stop them getting too far out into either a monopoly or some sort of superpower from a military sense.
Right. So, I mean, in society in the past, the media has been, the fourth estate that is aimed to kind of balance industry and balance government and things like that and hold accountability.
Oh yeah, go on. You got to open this can of worms. Yeah, go on.
The problem with media is that investigative journalism budgets have been gutted by the rise of social platforms and digital marketing, because there's just not nearly as much ad spend going through traditional journalism. So that role of the media as the fourth estate is kind of semi-broken down in society. So it's a really good question as to how do we create control structures, that keep a balance between the different areas of power within a society.
I was talking to a lady, she's in PR, and she was saying the volume of content that needs to be created at Stuff.
At Stuff, the media outlet.
Yeah. It's substantial. So the quality of the information's deteriorated. And then you think about what's being incentivized as clicks and advertiser spend. So the more influence an advertiser has, it might not be, said directly, but it's implied. And then the ability to track users. And if users keep getting drawn to more emotive content, more clickbaity. So what's the consequence of the truth,
Yes, it's a problem, and all the filter bubbles and things, and
I'll be curious. So there was an evolutionary psychologist that was on, Lex Friedman, and he was talking about how we have an adaptive view of the world. So it's not necessarily the truth, it's just what has enabled us to survive. Because if we invest too much energy in trying to process things, it would be a lot of energy needed to consume to sustain humans. Right. So we're not quite seeing it as it is.
Yes.
Then we're creating AI based on our misguided principles, potentially. How do you ensure AI continues to pursue the truth of life instead of being...
So you're saying that to conserve energy, humans aren't actually obsessed with truth, only a kind of a close enough approximation to get by.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
You don't have to agree with the hypothesis.
No, it's a very interesting point. I've never heard it made before. And then we are the sources of information that ultimately go into AIs, and there's another layer of potential misinterpretation within AIs. I don't really know, but I know that it's come up as, AIs doing things like being overtly racist because, maybe the information they've picked up on and processing something, or kind of unconsciously like profiling. Like say, for instance, they're doing, I think job screening was a particular one. So there is software now that uses AI to help, if you've got stacks and stacks of CVs and you're a big corporation, you're hiring thousands of people, how do you kind of like narrow that down to a small enough people that humans can interview them efficiently? So I think there's AIs in this space that like trawl through all the CVs and help make recommendations. And what they have found is there can be quite a lot of weird biases come through, but it's almost more of like just profiling based on its previous data?
Yeah. Well, it's tricky. I was talking. I just pushed this button because it goes for 30 minutes and then starts again. So the Elon Musk was talking about how they're training ChatGPT to lie in a way. So it's based.
The industry term is hallucinating.
Hallucinating, is it? Is that the word?
Yes.
Because there's certain things that are socially unacceptable to be interpreted from the data.
Right. I see what you mean.
Yeah, and then there's other instances where they don't want the AI to teach you how to make a bomb or whatever.
Right.
So it's hindering its access to truth in some way and training it inconsistent with reality. Do you think there's a consequence with that, or?
I've never thought about it. It does remind me a little bit of questions we asked about the web in the early days. Should it just be the Wild West, or should it be more controlled? And you don't want ChatGPT to tell people how to make a bomb. So, you do have to teach it to lie and say, well, it doesn't have to lie. It just have to say, I'm not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is that you can kind of get around a lot of this just by asking more obscure questions. Like, you might ask it what materials you should avoid selling because people could use them to make a bomb. I'm just spitballing here, but I have heard people put this, that if you actually know how to ask the right questions, you can still get the information out of it.
How do you limit it in a sense? Like, do you have any idea how that works? Because I've done that. I've tried to fuck with him and find loopholes. And then if there was certain periods where if you talk to a certain type of model within it, then you could get some leeway. Well, any idea how they are inhibiting what can be said, and how do they ensure it's not being used wrongly?
Yeah, well, we're not an AI we're not an AI manufacturer. Like, we integrate AIs using Open AI API that you mentioned earlier on when we were chatting, and but so we don't know a lot about what goes on behind the scenes.
Okay.
I can say that it's interesting. It's almost indistinguishable from magic, and even to software developers. I mean, we have some idea of the principles, but I still can't grasp how it can achieve everything it does. And but from what I can tell, even AI researchers often don't understand everything it does. There's a thing called Golem functionality where it's just like, oh, it can do that. I've got no idea how, even though I built it. I don't understand how it can do that.
Wow.
And so, when AI researchers are struggling to understand how it works and how it will develop in future, what hope do the rest of us have to have much clue?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Do you have an overarching understanding of how it basically works, like 6 billion, neural networks or whatever the hell that means? If not, we can go down the software route.
I understand things like how pattern recognition works. If you show AI, 1 million cat photos, and it sort of looking at the boundaries, it tries to define the shapes in that, and then it kind of works out the percentage likelihood that any given shape in another photo might be a cat. And in fact, AIs are better at recognizing cats and cat photos than humans are now. So that's just pattern recognition. And then you have sort of deep reinforcement learning, like the way humans learn. We learn things are reinforced. Oh, that was good, that was good, that was good, or that was bad. And we kind of, bring things up in our consciousness or push them down based on that. But knowing the principles of AI and knowing how it really works are two different things.
It's fascinating. Completely side tangent. I'm wondering, someone was saying that to me, certain types of technology, no matter how well run, break for some reason.
Right. Do you mean software?
Software, yeah, maybe software. Yeah. It was more how much of nature is incorporate, like the principles of natural law in a sense is incorporated in technology. Do you ever think about, You
ask some really good existential questions. I don't know if that's existential, but just very deep questions. I mean, there is a thing called code rot, but that's not really, it's not really nature. It's not really the laws of physics interfering with your code or anything. Because that might be a question, is like, there's various kind of quantum mechanics involved in computers, even a non-quantum computer. The very concept of a semiconductor, it relies on quantum jumping. So can you get random things that just throw a computer off based on physics issues? Probably. But of course, computers always have kind of error correction mechanisms. So they're constantly sort of check-summing things, and they'll kind of discard and redo something if they detect an error. So computers should typically be perfect. But code rot occurs because anything you build is kind of on top of a stack of all kinds of other technologies. Like computers at their basics are incredibly simple, but incredibly hard to understand. I mean, if you think of the zeros and ones levels, you can't really understand that. And then there's layer upon layer of technology up to something that a human can build on top of. Now, each of those things gets updated and has different versions and compatibilities, and they change in how they operate. So if a layer underneath gets changed and no longer properly supports something you built on top, it can break. But that's not organic. It's just a software development thing.
Well, I've seen my level of understanding code is TikTok, which is basically they're like, yeah, we sound like 10% of the time is coding, 90% is debugging. Don't use those percentages, but like, how does software work? Like, what's the process you go through in order to create something? Like, is there stages and steps? This is gonna be hard for you.
Sure. I mean, what are the stages you go through to write a book? I mean, you don't sit down and just write every word. Usually, some people might, but
I do.
What typically happens is you'll probably write out the skeleton of the structure you're going to write about in the book. So that's the kind of architecture phase of you're architecting your software to be something. With software, of course, there's a whole visual design element that you don't have with a book, but then you're kind of like writing the chapters, like here are all the pieces to deliver on each of these. And when you write it, it's not perfect first time. It needs kind of editing and refinement. It's the best analogy I can kind of give off the top of my head.
You did well. I'm just curious, like in making a car, there's a certain degree of division of labor and assignment to certain components.
Yeah.
What is there an archetype of person that tends to be good at different stages? Like the person that creates the archetype or the visual component thinks in a very big picture sort of way, and the person that finds the bugs is very detailed orientated, find things wrong with things.
Yeah. So software development these days is broadly split into front-end development and server-side development.
Okay.
So server-side development is all about data. So you set up data models, it's storing data in databases, it's providing data gateways to the front-end applications like mobile apps or web apps that interact with that. So someone whose life is around business logic and data is probably a bit different to a front-end developer, because the front-end developer is dealing very much in the user experience area. They're still coding to create the experience and the sort of user interface, but they typically tend to be much more, I don't want to generalize too much, but they do perhaps tend to be the more people-orientated developers, because their job is interacting with, they're creating the part that interacts with humans, and they're constantly having to think about how humans will interact with it.
Is there a certain component of the front-end development where it's like you have a process in order to get the truth of what the client needs? So part of it's like you make this thing, but it's based on the information from this person, and if that information's flawed, you could make an incredible development.
Yes,
so
that's a huge problem.
Okay.
It's one of the biggest problems in the industry. Clients don't usually know what they need in more than broad terms.
Imagine.
And so you can do a lot to kind of dig into that. There's a process called jobs to be done, which I really like, which is long form interviews, kind of like this, where you sit down with someone, you just ask them all about their job, and they just tell you all about their working life. That's one way to draw out kind of a lot of stuff that might not come up if somebody just wrote a list of requirements. At the end of the day, though, the main way this problem is solved is with agile development. So particularly in really large projects. Like the mid-sized space that we work in, it's not such a problem, but in large corporates, you often had this problem that business analysis would go in, they would work through requirements with people, they would write up spec sheets, and then they'd build something, they'd put it in front of people, and people would go, this just doesn't do what we want. And that's because no one could really envisage what they wanted until they started playing with it. So generally what will happen now is people just start sort of creating an interface and dummying it up and prototyping it and putting it in front of people and go, have a play with this, see what it does. Is this what you want, or should it be more like something else? And so you just get lots and lots of feedback rounds as you develop the whole kind of process between the user and the software.
So if I was putting myself in that experience, I'd need to manage the expectation to a certain degree. So a person wants to make this beautiful thing, you're giving them a minimal viable product, and they're like, oh, you're like, if you didn't tell them, hey, this is going to look a little shit to start with as we make adjustments. How do you manage behavior?
Yes, you have to explain the process to them, because sometimes the prototype might be a little bit uglier than the finished product.
Do you think about the behavioral part? So like someone comes in, you do this long form interview to identify problems, you have a minimal viable product and make adjustments. Do you think about how you give them hope as soon as possible? So we make this investment.
How you give them hope?
Yeah, because we're making this substantial investment to make this project.
Yes.
We want to see it progressing quickly and close to what we're hoping to achieve. Otherwise, it's like website developers say that they wait 6 months and then it's finished.
Yeah, well, I mean, that you never really want that. There has to be feedback cycles along the way. Otherwise, you're guaranteed to have taken some wrong turns. But I think there's some more and less. There are some parts that are difficult for clients in a project. So in the early stages, you might do lots of feedback cycles around designing up a user process and wireframing it out, and even doing the graphic design, and everyone gets clear on what it will look like and sort of what it will do. And then at the end, they get to sort of test something and you fine-tune it and give feedback. But there can be quite a long gap in the middle for a big project where it's just sort of like they're just getting a big bill each month and they can't really tell what's going on, and you're trying to tell them as best you can. But that can be the sort of the period of uncertainty for a client. And yes, you want to maintain hope. I mean, one good thing is I know with us is that we've never had a failed project, so we've done what it takes in the end to make sure we get there, But it is amazing when you hear about these big failed projects, and I've heard unbelievable stats on how many software projects fail, and I think, how does that happen? How do people stay in business if that many projects fail? It can be as high as sort of 70% in some contexts. And, everyone probably, well, of my age at least, probably remembers the big police INSYS project quite a few years ago now. It's probably 20 years ago. And they spent, I think, something like $100 million trying to create a kind of an overarching police computer data warehousing system. And the project just completely failed. And they got nothing out of it, except the computers they'd bought for it.
Wow. Why do they? What leads to you finishing it and then failing it? You know what I mean? Not that specific.
We're not doing $100 million project for a start, and we're not doing it for the police. I think that some of the difficulties there may have related to conflicting objectives within the police, changes in requirements along the way, but I think probably it also related to the fact that 20 years ago, agile development wasn't such a big thing. The development methodology was more waterfall. You get the requirements. It's like what I was talking about before. You get the requirements, and then you build something and then you put it in front of users. Whereas now there would have been a lot more kind of testing and feedback cycles and iteration to get to an end objective.
Yeah, it makes sense. You've done 38 minutes, mate.
Cool.
Flowing. I think that's an interesting point. I've been talking a lot to creatives and also the technical side of people, and it's not too dissimilar in the sense that you want to create this beautiful thing, but you have to face the reality of your work in order to achieve what you want. And it's a bit of an art where, how do you prepare a developer, maybe they're seasoned and they're used to it, to showing an incomplete project and having it open to judgment? Do you ever mentally prepare them for that, or are they already prepared? They're used to us normies not understanding it.
Yeah, The developers usually seem to take it pretty well.
Creatives don't.
Sometimes I find client feedback probably more frustrating than they do, because I've been really involved often at the kind of thinking conceptual and designing the product stage. And then if you think in your own mind that you've got that really nailed, and then you put it into, some wireframes or something, and then people kind of tell you it's all wrong. It's a little bit affronting, but I've never not found that working through the feedback that comes from clients. So sometimes you think their feedback might be quite off, and there is a place sometimes for even to like pushing back with your own opinion, but I've always found that when you actually work through it together and come to another conclusion, that it's improved something.
I've been following Alex Hormozi a lot. I don't know if you see him online.
No, I don't know that name.
He's American, but he's in his 20s. He's earning more than all the major CEOs of like Coke and fucking McDonald's, and he's doing well. And he talks about what value is, and what value is likelihood of achieving the outcome they want with the minimal amount of effort as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So
minimal effort and quickly as possible is really hard with software.
Yeah, so the idea is it's a lot of effort your end, but the client, you want to have them do as little as possible. So I'm wondering if we do a thought experiment, would there be a way for either you have only one meeting with them and you got to get all the information and what you'd need to do that, and then how to deliver it even quicker.
Flies in the face, though, of the whole
agile thing,
and which is so important to getting it right, because you can guarantee that what they say in that first meeting won't be the end of the matter in terms of really understanding deeply their needs, because, as I said, they don't even understand deeply their needs. They may at one level, but they don't at the level of what exactly should be on a screen, how exactly should it flow. So I just don't think it would work for us. I think the key for us in terms of getting that sort of barrier down, and it's something we're really focused on, because we're in those mid-sized projects.
It's not a door knock, she's just stamping.
Because we're in those mid-sized projects, it's really important for us to try and lower the barrier to development, because mid-market companies, software development is just really expensive. And I often say our biggest competitor is people doing nothing because the price is just too high. So one of the things that we've been doing is building our own low-code code generator, and also experimenting with AI tools, particularly in terms of how we can fuse the two together, because it's really necessary to sort of just look at your tooling to see how you can kind of rapidly speed up the process of writing code. If you just sit there these days and write all your code as traditional high code, chances are it's just going to be too expensive for the market.
Is there ever so he talks about minimal effort, so it's not just, it doesn't have to just be that one meeting, but how can we turn their feedback into, let's say, a 10-second experience for them where you get the feedback? And then the other thing is he talks about charging more to less people, and people are unable to do that in a lot of ways. But if you're part of them making more money and you have a performance component to your software, do you ever think about the different pricing models that have worked and haven't worked, and what you find is useful in your world?
For us, in our industry, we keep our company quite lean and quite closely aligned between our developer resources and projects. And that allows us to keep our hourly rate down to, let's say, right now around 150-ish an hour. So you either charge a lot more than that, and you have a lot more middle layers and fat, like some of the really big companies, or you don't worry so much about your alignment. You can have quite a few people who aren't really productive some of the time, just ready to plug into a project. But so there's efficiencies like that to try and keep costs down. I sort of think I've lost the thread of what you are asking, though. Just clarify the question again.
Let's say if you were to provide a service that was $1 million, what would it be? It was more like, how can you charge more?
How can you charge more? Right. Yes. So I was heading in that direction.
Good.
So, but first of all, the reason I'm talking about how you keep costs down is because at the moment, because there's so many hours required for software development, it's not really easy to charge a lot more than what you kind of just have to charge to run a business effectively. But obviously it'd be nice in terms of margins of a business to be able to charge a bit more than that or add something on top. So our thinking is that if we can get really good low-code plus AI-driven development tools in place that give us the ability to create high-quality software faster than anyone else in the market, in the mid-market in New Zealand, then we can charge a bit more of a premium. So that might be either something for the background technology we're using, or it might just be we can charge a higher hourly rate because we can shrink down the hours.
Interesting, because I've randomly been interviewing a lot of agencies because I was gonna have a white label service for them, but then I was like, nah, we don't gel that well, me and agencies. But I was talking to a lot of them about like website development and how long it takes, and that it's really hard to sell. It's a high cost.
Yeah.
So I posed it to my friend. I'm like, if you were to do this in 7 days, but you charge more, how would you do it? And he's like, oh, we'll do this. And he actually ended up changing his business to having designers and agencies as partners, so all they do is the development component. So they have a really
they've got a very specialized role.
Yeah. And then they're not dependent on the feedback of the client and how long that takes the client, so they can deliver very quickly.
Yeah.
So apart from AI, is there any other way that you're looking on how to turn around things quicker?
So you said apart from AI, but that's exactly what I was thinking in terms
okay,
of,
just AI.
Websites and things. But if it's not just AI though. Obviously, websites have been very commoditized by all these SaaS platforms where you can just log in and create a website with minimal skills very quickly, and they can look quite good and be quite good websites up to a point. That's the way to keep website costs down. But there is a point where certain companies need something a lot more custom than that, and maybe more control over the performance and other factors and integration. And then they need to go to something like a WordPress-based website. And then that's a completely different cost scale. And that is kind of hard for people to sort of fathom why you go from a $3,000 website to a $50,000 website just because it's a little bit more complicated.
It's funny. I think I find it interesting. Like if you're going to go far in New Zealand, in my opinion, is you got to charge clients more, but some clients can't pay more. So if you help them earn more and you have a percentage of that increase, because you think
I get what you're driving at. So you can use tools to try and make yourself more productive, and then you can charge more for your time. But at the same time, there might be other business models you could explore, right? Like you're saying you could explore, and you get this with website development where it's not that common, but some people will say, well, we'll set up an e-commerce store and we'll take some kind of percentage, or we'll do your SEO work, your search engine optimization, and we'll just take a clip on your increased sales from your current sales now. But it's very high risk for a developer, and it probably also relies on a certain amount of honesty. Yeah.
So the workaround with that is it's a pay per show, so you're not actually charging on the results because you can't influence those necessarily. Maybe e-commerce you could a little more, but it's more about charging for the thing that you have transparency over and you can influence.
Right, charging for an end result, not building a product.
Yeah, so
you're the investor. It's a great idea, but it makes you the investor, right? Because now you're the investor in their business. So you really have to. But I guess if you're a very experienced marketer, you might be pretty confident in what you can produce.
Yeah, it's like if you're going to B2B, like you charge. They have poor quality leads. They have to invest a lot of money without getting results, and they have limited time. So if you help actually put them in front of the person that they want to meet, and it's all qualified already.
Yes.
And just charge at that point, because I used to charge per each time they make a sale, because I was like, oh, well, I could make more, but then they wouldn't sell. So I'll change my own model because of what you're basically just saying there, that trust part.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's a complete side tangent. I was just curious. I like asking people how would they charge more if they could, and what would they change to
So
justify
you do
it.
seem to have something particular that you're driving at here. Like how does this relate to your business model?
It was just a lesson. Like, so I struggle with self-worth and feeling deserving of charging a price. So I'd always try and tack into the performance component, because then I can charge more because I'm delivering it, and it gives me reassurance.
Right. Yes.
But it's more just the realization that price is a huge determiner of the success of a business, and being able to charge more is the same amount of work. You have better clients and there's less, frustrations and iterations.
Yes.
So there's no actual ulterior motive as to asking. It's more just the realization how important price is, and understanding why some people can charge more, and also to test if less effort, delivering quicker, and achieving the outcome they want is actually value.
Yes.
Seems to be.
Yes. And I think if you can create some kind of success-driven business model where you get paid for results, it's definitely more sellable.
Yeah.
It de-risks a lot for the client.
Yeah. Well, see, he wrote a book called Irresistible Offers, and that's what it's about. How to create an offer that's easy to sell.
Yeah.
Because I used to just be told what I'm selling, and now I
Yes.
can think about what I'm selling, which is a bit of a problem in itself. But
Yeah, you just have to have the sort of financial buffer to probably be able to explore the actual effects of running a business model like that for a while.
We'll see. I'll let you know. So we've done. We're at the end of our podcast. I don't know why I took it there, but what would be, I guess,
very interesting, wide-ranging
we'll
discussion.
go anywhere, brother.
Yeah.
I guess what would be something that you would want as like a closing realization, either about AI or about something you're interested in? What would be someone listening that you'd like to impart a curious thought?
We've covered so much territory, it makes it hard. Well, I do think AI is extremely important right now. I think my closing observation would be that if people aren't exploring how AI might affect their industry, they should be. It's still early enough that if they get onto it now, they're probably going to be ahead of the curve in most industries, probably a bit behind the curve in marketing, if they're only doing it now. But I think, look, regardless of what the future is, we have to embrace it, and we're probably going to be better placed as a society to know what we want to control about AI if we engage with it and work with it. We're not going to get rid of it, and it's all our competitors will be using it. And I say that because, there are certain industries where AI will have really big effects, but even outside of that, every industry, there's a bunch of tools that will just speed up productivity for staff.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, it was a very varied subject matter. You did well. All the best with your speech, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. I appreciate the interesting questions.
You're right, brother. Well, you survived.